Aspreva, that's the name of the small company from just over the water. If you take a boat through these little islands that you can see over there, you hit a little town on Vancouver Island called Victoria, named after Queen Victoria, who apparently never visited Victoria, which I find remarkable. And every year on May the 24th, I think, it comes to a standstill to celebrate Queen Victoria's birthday. Again, she never visited the place. So anyway, that's an aside. Aspreva became Vi4, V4, whatever you want to call it. So it's the same thing, but the study is known as ALMS, the Aspreva Lupus Management Study, and that name lives on. So I'm just going to give you a little bit more background to what we've been doing with CellCept, or mycophenolate mofetil. So just to reiterate, what is Aspreva? Well, partnered with Roche, the big Swiss giants, who and the idea is to develop CellCept in rare diseases. It was a real passion of the founders of the company to actually do something commercially for patients who are suffering from rare diseases. And yes, lupus is not a common disease. Many people have never heard of it, but many people have never heard of these diseases. Myasthenia gravis, which is related to muscle weakness, pemphigus vulgaris, which is a very, very nasty skin disease that's incredibly rare, probably 100 times rarer than lupus, and lupus nephritis, the kidney manifestation of lupus. So CellCept, there was a show of hands, you've nearly all heard of it. You probably know what it is. Mycophenolate mofetil is the other name. It's approved, it's licensed for the prevention of rejection in patients who have transplants, kidneys, livers, hearts. It suppresses the immune system. It's a fairly broad immune suppressant that's given in transplant patients with steroids and also a drug called cyclosporin, which some of you will have either taken or heard of at least. A very successful and very, very effective drug that's probably the #1 immunosuppressant in the United States for transplant. It's in some ways very specific as well. It targets the activated T and B cells, and the activated cells are the ones that are causing the problem. So when you have a transplant put in, it sort of wipes out the cells that are specifically targeting the transplant. The idea is it leaves all the rest of the cells behind functioning. That's not quite what happens. You can still get side effects from this drug, but it's certainly much better than the other drugs that used to be used in transplantation that used to wipe out the immune system and leave patients very vulnerable to very, very bad infections. Doctors who are using, especially nephrologists, kidney doctors who are using CellCept to prevent rejection in their transplants, thought, well, wouldn't it be a good idea to start using this drug in our patients who have very bad kidney disease from lupus? And that, many of you will be aware, was done by a number of pioneers, physicians who were working on our steering committee on this ALMS study. People like Marianne Dooley, David Jane as well, were very big users of CellCept in the early days in lupus nephritis. But again, quite small studies. And then a group out of the United States, Dr. Ginzer's group, did a study of CellCept against cyclophosphamide, which was mentioned. And Aspreva decided to discuss things with the regulatory authorities in Europe and also the United States, and decided to actually scale up this study and do a much, much larger study, which I'll describe in a minute or two. Needless to say, regardless of the fact this drug is not licensed or approved in anything other than transplantation, the drug is widely used in a variety of autoimmune diseases. So don't be put off by this picture. It really is a complicated study. Don't need to know the details, but I'm going to explain them very briefly. Does this? Yes, I've got my laser work. Okay, this is the induction phase. So this is lupus nephritis, patients with flaring lupus nephritis, really bad lupus nephritis. And we really had some very, very sick patients coming into the study from all over the world. And this was the induction phase. And they were randomized to either receive high-dose CellCept, 3 grams a day, or intravenous cyclophosphamide chemotherapy. And this was on a background of reducing corticosteroids. So patients were on approximately 60 milligrams a day sometimes at the beginning of the study, and this was tapered down over a 24-week period to 10 milligrams a day. So I'll just refresh your memory of those results in a second. But what happened was patients who responded, who had some response. So the protein that was excreted in the urine, which was a big feature of this disease, was reduced by approximately 50%. And if that was the case, then they're allowed to continue in the study. And for up to 3 years, they're randomized to either receive CellCept or azathioprine on a background of 10 milligrams of steroids. So this is the bit here, the maintenance phase, that you will be hearing a bit more about at this Congress and over the next few weeks. So patients were followed up to 3 years, really quite a long time. And they were followed to see if they had a relapse of the disease, to see whether the disease flared again, to see whether the kidneys got worse. When they were randomized into maintenance, the disease was under control. When they went into the maintenance phase, the idea was to see whether these drugs could keep the disease under control. So don't be put off by the picture. I'll come on to a little bit more detail about what we found. So this has been my life, certainly, for the last few years. In 2005, almost exactly 5 years ago, the first patient was randomized into the ALMS study, into the induction phase. So the first patient with severe acute flaring kidney disease. The last patient, there were 370 in total, was entered in October of the following year. And the last patient completed the induction phase over 3 years ago. So when we get into the maintenance phase, the numbers went down a bit because not everybody who went into the acute phase of the study was successfully treated. Some of them left, some of them had adverse events, some of them did not fulfill the criteria to get into the next phase of the study. So we had 227 out of the 370 who made it into the maintenance phase, and this has been going on until the spring of this year, and the results we found out the results a few weeks ago. So just a reminder, this was the induction phase results. The colours, I'm afraid, aren't very good, and we don't need to go into too much detail. This has been published, but as Dr. Merrill said, the CellCept was shown to be as good as cyclophosphamide. So if you're taking a tablet twice a day, that was shown to be as good as this chemotherapy, cyclophosphamide. And this is the overall response rate. It was 56% of CellCept patients responded against 53% of the cyclophosphamide patient. Now, what was interesting is when we began to look at the data and what we looked at the different races of patients who were in the study, because it's well known that people from all over the world suffer their lupus in different ways. This was the results for the Asian patients. Not much difference, a little bit higher response in cyclophosphamide, but not statistically significant. But when we got to the other group, which included black patients and Hispanic patients, mainly from the US, but some of them from Latin America as well, and a handful from Europe as well, we found that these patients did significantly better on CellCept in induction than they did on cyclophosphamide. Or should I say they did significantly worse on cyclophosphamide. This is the cyclophosphamide response rate in the group of patients, as I say, from the US and Latin America, largely black patients and Hispanic patients as well. So that was an interesting result. But on we went anyway. It was considered at the time by the companies that this wouldn't be good enough to get a regulatory approval for the reasons which we've just heard, because CellCept needed to be better than cyclophosphamide, and it wasn't. It was as good as, but it wasn't better. So we went into the maintenance phase. Let's see, 4 more years of this to go. So what we did is we took patients who had shown a response or a complete remission, so the disease was much more under control after 24 weeks. And then they were allowed to go into the maintenance phase, and 227 of those subjects were randomized into either CellCept or azathioprine, and then followed for up to 3 years. And the primary endpoint, again, a lot of detail here, but the basis of the endpoint was to see how long it took patients to fail therapy. And a failure was defined as as basically getting a relapse of your kidney disease, either a flare of your lupus or something more serious. And that was the primary endpoint, time to treatment failure, to see how long you could go on being well before you got a relapse of your disease. So the results, and you're going to be hearing a bit more about this if you're at the Congress on Saturday. David Woffsey is presenting the results of this study. I can't tell you any more at the moment, but that CellCept was superior to azathioprine. It was quite a lot superior, actually, in delaying the time to treatment failure. So basically, if you take CellCept and you've got your lupus nephritis under control, it'll take a lot longer for your disease to come back than if you took azathioprine on the background of low-dose corticosteroids. The results were significant. For those of you that want to know what that means, basically you're looking for a figure of less than 0.05, and that clinicians and statisticians will say, well, this is unlikely to be a chance occurrence. This is probably true. This is probably what you'd find if you took the drug into the clinic. It's not quite as simple as that, but almost. The safety, well, CellCept does have side effects. It's an immunosuppressant. So the immune system is suppressed. You can get more infections with it than if you didn't take it. You can get diarrhea and nausea as well. It's quite a powerful drug, but it led to very, very few people having to stop taking it. Virtually everybody who took CellCept and were able to tolerate the drug for up to the 3-year period. So the side effects were certainly not nice, but they were manageable in most patients. And what's more, the side effects were less than the patients who were taking Imuran or azathioprine, which was considered the standard of care in this area as well. So you're going to get a few more details about this study on Saturday, and I think that's probably it. And I'll be able to answer any questions, I think, when we have the discussion. Thank you.